Hello and welcome to this RedMonk conversation. My name is Kate Holterhoff, Senior Analyst at RedMonk, and with me today I have Austin Parker, Director of Open Source at Honeycomb and a maintainer on the OpenTelemetry project. Austin, thanks so much for joining me on the Monkcast.
Thanks for having me. It is super great to be here.
Oh, so
Finally.
exciting. I know. We've been talking about this for a while. I think at least since Render, definitely last year, I think it came up.
Yeah, I feel like we every time we're interested, oh, we gotta do the pod, and then it never happens. And now we're here, we're doing the pod.
I know. We're done kicking the can down the road. Okay. Well, for the benefit of folks who maybe haven't had the chance to chat with you, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Honeycomb and, just maybe some of your background if relevant.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I am Director of Open Source at Honeycomb, which is, you wear a lot of hats at any small company / startup. And I think I am trying to get a record of how many hats I wear at Honeycomb most days. But this year, at least, I've been involved in two big things. One is working with our product and engineering teams on how to really embrace OpenTelemetry as a company. I think one interesting thing about Honeycomb is that we were very early to the OTel party. We're one of the I would certainly argue most OTel native observability tools out there. But even with that said, there's always more to do, and OTel is always changing and growing. So I really try to help our engineering teams be aware of what's coming and how to really make sure that we're aligned with what OpenTelemetry is doing. And then also this year, I've been doing a lot with AI. I've been working with our AI team on some of our recent product launches and experiences. I helped build our model context protocol server this year. And a lot of stuff like that. And it's gotten me thinking a lot about observability and our new AI overlords. So that's been fun. Outside of that, I do a lot of work with the community. I help organize the Observability Day at KubeCon, OpenTelemetry Community Days, and Open Source Observability Summits. Working on some stuff for next year right now too. OTel Unplugged, which is going to be at FOSDEM with our friends at Grafana. And I am also working, and in my copious free time, I'm helping write the next edition of Observability Engineering.
Wow. Oh my God. Yeah. So I am learning a little bit in this conversation. Let's dig into some of that. This is exciting. All right. So when I invited Austin on, I asked him, what he's been working on lately in terms of like thought leadership. And he sent me 2 blog posts. I will provide links in the show notes. The first one is, it's the end of observability as we know it, and I feel fine. As someone very close to Athens, Georgia, geographically, I love a good REM reference. So that's fun.
Who doesn't?
I don't know. Who are these people? And then the other one is, how does vibe coding work with observability, which I cite in my recent piece on the hot vibe code summer on RedMonk's blog. So I certainly got some interesting tidbits from that. So I'm hoping we can dig into some of that. And in addition to, I don't know, I guess your larger projects at work and in the OpenTelemetry space. So can we begin with MCP? I think that's...
Yes.
That's a good starting place. All right. So you mentioned in one of these pieces that you built the MCP server, I'm sure with some help, so the MCP server for Honeycomb, and that Claude Code can use it autonomously. So you mentioned that Claude Code wanders off sometimes to query Honeycomb unexpectedly, but actually helpfully. And I thought that was a really interesting framing. So just maybe lay out the history of the MCP server at Honeycomb, what it's doing, and what are some of these use cases that you're seeing?
Yeah. So I think, quite broadly, you say anything about Gen AI or MCP or whatever, and in 6 months, you're going to be proven wrong by the inexorable march of history. And so I think it's interesting that you brought up, that it's the end of observability as we know it piece, because that was about 6 months ago, I want to say, give or take, right? I think that was like March, April timeframe.
Okay.
And since then, I think there's been 2 things that have really happened around MCP and around this observability, AI-powered observability space that's been really interesting to me. One is I've had a lot more time to, play with it. And let's start with that. So for those that, maybe don't know, or just a general primer, at the end of the day, any observability tool is just a fancy query interface, right? You have a bunch of data that is some type, metric, log, trace, whatever, right? But you have this big honking stream of data, and you need to get through that data, and you need to be able to say, you need to ask good questions. Ask questions like, okay, hey, I see this thing change. Why did it change? Right? Help me correlate all this stuff together. Help me like figure it out. And historically, as an industry, we've built query languages, we've built very fancy machine learning primitives and ways to sort of surface interesting things. We've built these pre-built dashboards and alerts and run books and all this stuff to really help, to say, okay, I have this data and I kind of know what this data is because I either, you know, I wrote some instrumentation for this very common framework, and I know that when this particular signal goes up too much, that's bad. And so I'm going to codify that. I'm going to put it in a dashboard and I'm going to ship it to someone and say, like, okay, you're fine until this squiggly line gets too squiggly, and then it's bad. Um, because these are, all of this stuff is more or less known, right? Like we know generally what to care about with an HTTP server. We know generally what to care about with gRPC, or we know generally that like error logs mean something is going wrong, right? Like an exception, a stack trace, that's a it's a signal that like something happened and we should care about that. And we've written all this stuff down over and over and over on the internet. And so it should be little surprise that when you take a large language model that is basically trained on, you know, all of the data on the internet, that it also can see like, oh, hey, there's an exception. That means something's weird, right? Um, I should care about that. And I think and that's really what led me down this road of MCP in the first place, because my thought process was, and this is somewhat not unorthodox thinking at Honeycomb, I would say, the unknown unknowns place, right? But most things aren't unknown. Most problems that happen in software systems are pretty like they're not novel. The novel failures are when you are the result of complexity, right? Like as I get more and more things, and a lot of, boring failures tend to accumulate into novel expressions of those failures. Or like, oh, I have 5 things that all could happen that all independently could happen and it'd be fine, but when they all 5 happen at the same time, like that causes a problem, right? Like there's all da 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 da. Most, I think from a practical perspective, most problems, the way they present are novel, but the problems themselves are not novel. And so if you take that realization, you say, okay, what is the language model good at doing? It's good at finding patterns. It's good at like searching through this compressed knowledge of everything on the internet. If you suddenly give that model the ability to say like, oh, okay, let me go look at data to query across all of this data, then the model is able to do that faster and better than a human. Like when you get down to it, right? Like there's never going to be a time that's not true, which is what led me to write that post in the first place, right? Like there is never going to be like we've definitely hit this thermocline, I think, where the models will get, you could argue maybe that the models won't get foundationally better. I don't necessarily know if that's a bet I would take, but you can definitely argue that they'll get cheaper to run, they'll get faster, they'll get more efficient, they'll get better at using tools. They'll get better at all of these things, maybe even if the level of intelligence, quote unquote, never really gets above where we're at right now. And when you combine that with like, oh, most failures, most things aren't actually in and of themselves non-novel problems. They're just a combination of these boring problems put together. Then humans are kind of cooked when it comes to the observability game, right? Because you're always going to be in a place where where the robot can now go off and look and come up with hypotheses and generate and discard things much more quickly than I ever can. it can be wrong 100 times before I'm wrong once. And that I think is really powerful. That's a really powerful model for us to internalize as sort of like people that care about observability. Um, so that's what got me thinking about, that's what got me down this path, right? Like, hey, if we can do this, if we can really automate this hypothesis generation, um, then how far can we run with it? What can we really do with that? And what I've seen, over the past 6 months or so, working in this space and writing, the MCP server and getting it in front of customers, and that's what I'm finding people are doing, right? Like with the people that we have that are more AI native, they're just using the AI to do their investigations, right? When a problem happens, they're not going into the UI, they're not going and looking at a dashboard. They're saying like, "Hey, Claude, what's up?" Right? Like, figure this out. And yeah, Claude might be wrong the first time. It might be wrong, but it can get to the right answer eventually, or it gets to the right answer like when you work with it. And you can take the things that you learn and you can that makes you better at doing this again the next time, right? Because now you can start from a position of like, okay, well, I know it's probably not all of these things. And so I'm going to put that in some sort of rules file, or I'm going to give the model guidance when I prompt it to say, hey, it's usually something over here, right? Like you're working with the AI to um, come up with these patterns of using it that make you more efficient at using it, make the and reduce the number of like, oh, I'm gonna go over this way, I'm gonna go over that way, right? Um, Reduce the amount of side quests that Claude goes down.
So I thought what was so interesting about that argument, and within the piece, it's sort of a 60-cent investigation where you have this demo and you're saying that AI is solving a complex latency issue for like 60 cents in
Yeah.
80 seconds. And so I feel like there's two takeaways from this. And the first one is to the practitioners themselves. Like, are we then going to abandon the SRE teams that have historically done this sort of work? And the other one is to vendors themselves. Like, and this is, you have some amazing framing around this. You say, if your product's value proposition is nice graphs and easy instrumentation, you are le cooked. You left out that lay when you mentioned cooked earlier.
I did. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and it's inexcusable because that's hilarious. So I want to talk about both sides of this, and let's maybe begin with the vendors. So, what sort of advice then are you giving to vendors who have maybe historically had very beautiful graphs and easy instrumentation? What pivot are you recommending to them?
Yeah, I actually want to swap the order real quick.
Let's do it.
Because I think because what the vendors are doing is they're starting from that first part, right? They're starting from a position of like, oh, well, you don't need an SRE team anymore. And what I think is interesting is that the other thing I've noticed in the past 6 months is that how incredibly wrong that is. Because I have talked to a lot of people that are, I'm not going to name names. I'm not here to drag people, but I've talked to a lot of people at a lot of companies that you and I have both heard of who have been evaluating, AI SRE agents. Because that's, now that's the hotness, right? It's MCP, who cares about MCP? Now it's agents. There's a lot of companies out there that are building the idea of like, oh, you don't need a human SRE team anymore. You don't need, you don't need people to do this. You just need a bot that can go off and do all this stuff for you. And I think, and the practical experience that I have seen people have, at least with off the shelf stuff, I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to it in a minute. But like with the startups that are saying, oh, we're going to build an AI SRE, a general purpose AI SRE, I have not heard good things from people turning this on against their production systems. I have heard usually really bad things.
Mm.
Like, and again, I don't want to name names, but I also want to say that I've talked to dozen people about this. And they've tried them all. Like, this isn't there's a good one and there's some bad ones. It's like all of them generally suck in general, right? Now, there are specific cases where it does work. Obviously the ways that they demo work very well, but I think even the people that I would say are more charitable are like, it works for things that are very constrained, right? Like if you really set up a lot of guardrails and you say like, okay, you are going to go do this one thing or this, or I'm going to give you, I'm like, hey, AI agent, I'm going to give you like a run book and your job is to do the run book. That stuff works. Now, I think there's a real question of like, how much of an agent is, like, how much AI is this, right? This seems very deterministic. And it's like, yeah, like maybe you have an AI orchestrator that's pattern matching to like, oh, when XYZ things happen, we've seen this before, we need to like go through this run book, and that's a very deterministic thing. And I think there is definitely value there, right? Especially at large organizations. And that's when I talk to people that like pretty large, older, more traditional enterprise who already think this way, who that is their, incident response for them is like, we go, a failure happens, we check the run books, we check the knowledge base, and we see like, oh yes, this is an instance of this. And then when that happens, like, okay, step one, do this, step two, right? And that's a flow chart. And that stuff, yes, like you can make an AI agent that will do that flow chart for you and replace, some lower tier sort of IT roles. But that's a far cry from like, oh, we don't need an SRE anymore. And so what I think, so back to the first point, which is like, well, what do the vendors do? I actually I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Ah,
I think there's a lot of people that are going to try to figure out stuff. I think there's certainly, you know, I think the most interesting question obviously is like, well, if we assume true, I think this is the case. Like, if you assume that the near term future, the 2 to 5 year time frame is develop, the impact of Gen AI mostly will be around software developers and software development. The impact of Gen AI will be that more people are building and running code. The impact of Gen AI is that we now have, even more complexity out there. I think the question for vendors is like, okay, how do you make your platform? How do you make your observability platform a better partner, a better way? How do you plug into these Gen AI workflows? Like, how do you, what is the interface you give to an LLM? What's the interface you give to an AI agent? Do you provide sort of your own AI agents that are good at using your tools to use your platform? What does the integration point look like, right? Like, these are questions that I don't think we have answers to. We don't have like hard and fast answers to, but I think they're important questions. Um, and that's kind of where I'm trying to lead. That's where I'm telling people right now, right? Like, think of the AI as like a weird idiosyncratic, user that you need to write user stories for, um, and start and build along those lines.
you mentioned that fast feedback is the only feedback,
Yeah,
and I like that idea because it's so concrete. But what I have become interested in recently is this new normal of waiting for good feedback. And so I'm thinking of companies like CodeRabbit who actually talk about the length of time that it takes to get you back your answer as being a feature, not a bug, and that it shows that it's working. And I've seen this in my own life when I'm using Claude, and I use the better model to do some work. I'm suspicious if it goes too quickly. I'm like, no, you haven't been thinking long enough. And that's actually an option, right? Think longer. And so length of time actually seems to be suggesting quality in ways that it hasn't in the past with other SaaS products, right? So like we're in this new normal of waiting. And I'm wondering how that applies to the observability world, because I agree that speed is always good. Velocity is always a positive. We all want things to happen quickly. And obviously, if I was waiting way too long for a response from Claude, I would be annoyed, right? But there's this
yeah.
sweet spot here. And so I'm wondering how you're approaching that. Like, where is, and I think that goes beyond the trade-off of like speed versus correctness, right? There's all kinds of little
Yeah, I mean,
platitudes about that, right?
in the context of like a Gen AI thing, like thinking is interesting. The speed is interesting there because you're really talking about two different things. Right? Like, let's take your code wrapping example. There's time to first token, and then there's time to, actually getting a response. And I think that anyone would tell you that, oh, actually, you want like the time to first token to be very low. Like you want to be able to give people, the user, very fast feedback that yes, I have received what you are telling me, and I am going to start working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't get that, if you just like typed something in, if you just hit at code rabbit or whatever in your Git issue, and then it took 5 minutes before you got any indication that something was happening, you would be like, this fucking sucks.
Very
Um,
true. Yes.
and so like let the immediate answer, the no thinking answer often is going to be, could be less correct. I do want to also point out, like often, just like in humans, the thinking response is sometimes not the right response. Like you give the LLM too much time, and it'll get it in its own head, and it'll like doubt itself, and you'll give it anxiety. Um, but that aside, like yeah, obviously a model, you give the model more time, you give it more tokens, you give it more budget for it to think about things, and for it to reason, and for it to go through, all these different very fancy vector maths, and you will get a different answer versus the snap one. But in the context of like an observability platform or a query platform, then you really do want to be able to optimize for speed of, you want to be able to make trade-offs, I should say, around speed and efficiency. I think the best example of this is something OpenAI is doing right now with parallel tool calls. So in GPT-5, GPT-5 is trained to be able to say like, oh, okay, I can just go off and like do 5 different things at once. I can make 5 different tool calls and then and stream all those responses back. And so if you tell GPT-5 like, oh, okay, hey, please go like, hey, I have an incident, or hey, please go investigate this thing, or help me figure this out. It can say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to come up with like 5 different theories right now and go do queries in parallel to like investigate those, and then drop the ones that don't make sense. And if those queries take 3 seconds, great. If they take 30 seconds, if they take 3 minutes, ooh, right? So because every moment that the LLM is there waiting, every minute or second that the LLM is waiting for that tool call response, like that's a minute that it's not doing something else. And I think you do start to get into like really interesting sort of like tokenomics and stuff if you have very long queries, right? If you have like, because keep in mind, caching for most you always want to be hitting the cache for tokens, because otherwise it's mundo expensive. So, but the cache is like 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. If it's 5, then if your queries take 5 minutes, or if you have to go and do like super, queries that take like 5, 10, 15 minutes or whatever, then all those tokens have expired in the cache. And now you're having to like constantly be, hitting it with like more expensive, you're sending all this stuff back in, and it's more expensive, and da, 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 da. Like that's a like over here sort of thing. That's probably not something people are optimizing around. But I do think it's really relevant for how we think about inputs into these sort of agentic workflows. Like the model should have more time. We should give the models more time to think and do stuff. But we want the inputs. We want, when the model goes and tries to like get something, it should be quick. For the same reasons that it's good that it's quick for us, right? Like if you or I want, to find an answer for something, then we want that. We want a quick response, right? We want our Google searches or whatever to be fast. We want our Amazon searches to be quick. Makes us happy. And if you are a non-mechanistic LLM person, then you probably want to optimize for the happiness of the model, because a happy model probably performs better, if such a thing can be said to exist. I don't know.
Yeah. No, everything you say makes sense. And I appreciate you segmenting the time to token versus just like responding to the user. And so that seems like some, Nielsen Norman sort of user experience best practices, which we are rewriting in the age of AI. And I don't know that I've seen a good post on that yet. So maybe that's, something you can handle, Austin. You got that one, right? You're gonna write that out?
Again, my copious free time.
Exactly. All right. So that's in your capable hands here. Okay. So I want to talk about another larger problem, and that's about abstractions. And yes. So you dig into it though. You did the thing. So like you're asking for this basically. But and I don't want to get too hand wavy with this question because I think at the end of the day we end up in the same sort of issue of like, oh, what's the right balance for abstractions? Right. But maybe things are changing, right? We keep talking about how things are subtly shifting, dramatically shifting, right? So yeah, let's talk about the paradox. So you note that new abstractions make software more accessible by hiding complexity, but then require new observability tools to understand that hidden complexity. And so I'm curious, is this just an infinite recursion situation, in these abstraction layers? And where would you say it ends? Like, what's the sweet spot?
Oh, gosh. I wish I could tell you. I think I do think that some of it's cyclical. I think there's I posted on Blue Sky over the weekend or I saw a post that was like small data. It was called small data. And I went and read it because it confirmed my priors, but also because I was curious. It's like, yeah, you hear about big data.
Right.
It's like, here's someone talking about small data. Cool. And what it brought up, I think, was very interesting is that like when we talk about hardware, a lot of times now, I feel like, especially in sort of the B2B SaaS world, we wind up talking about hardware. We talk about hardware through the proxy of like, what does AWS charge us? Or what is Azure charges? Or what is GCP? Right? Like, or we're talking about like hardware. We're talking about hardware. We're talking about not the actual cost of hardware sometimes. We're talking about the cost of renting hardware. And we're not even talking about actually renting the hardware. We're talking about renting like time divided slices of, capacity on these globally redundant. We're talking, the cost that we pay per byte of data stored or sent or whatever is fantastically disconnected from like all of the underlying things that have to happen for that byte to go somewhere. But if you look at it from a practical perspective, like what is the actual dollars and cents cost of hardware these days? And what is the actual dollars and cents cost of storage, especially? Over the past 10 years, compute has gotten ridiculously cheaper and more efficient. A lot of this is thanks to like ARM64 and thanks to Apple for making ARM viable. I'm only halfway kidding. But like the prices for NVMe storage have gone super down, right? Like you can get fantastic amounts of storage on a chip at a fraction of the cost that you could have, 10 years ago, right? Like memory has gotten cheaper. Everything has gotten cheaper, smaller, more efficient. And if you think about it in those terms, like what is the absolute cost of something to store bits and bytes on and move them around and do computing, that has all gotten ridiculously cheap. And so we've also started to see kind of software, like, one layer up, I guess, if we take hardware as this big general abstraction layer and say like, okay, well, software runs on top of hardware. We see databases like OLAP style databases, things like ClickHouse or like DuckDB or whatever that are capable of doing just like, quite frankly, ridiculous throughput on like low grade, on fairly small amounts of hardware. Like I think a not terribly highly spec'd box can do, and a single instance of ClickHouse can do something like 1 million inserts per second, which is a lot. Like I would say for 90, like I hate making like broad statements like this because I feel like I'm always so off. But if you think about, of all software on the planet, like how many people are really doing more than 1 million writes per second to a data store? There are a few. And certainly there are applications that are, but if you average it out, and which is a shitty way to think about this, but still, like so much of our software is really overbuilt. And because the way we think about hardware, the way we think about the capabilities of this is through maybe the incorrect abstraction layer. We're thinking about it not as the actual underlying capabilities of the hardware that we can use, but we're thinking about it as what is the value, what is this like hardware to rented time abstraction that we actually pay? And that's what we actually think about, because buying a server and racking a server is like CapEx and we can't do that. Nobody's giving, and I think that's, in some ways, that's the system is incentivized for that, right? Like nobody's out there giving you credits on racking a server, right? Dell's not out there saying like, oh yeah, hey, you're a startup, cool, here's a new Optiplex or whatever. Or there's no like free amperes for garages. Hey, someone go call Oxide. Here's a brilliant marketing strategy for them. But like, you see my point, right? Like, because we think about it this way, because the economic value, like the incentives all align to like, oh yes, we prefer you to think about these abstractions in terms of like, what does it cost you to rent these abstractions? And especially now with like the new wave of stuff where you're your Vercels, your Lovables, your V0s, whatever, right? Replets, where, oh no, we're actually talking like all of this stuff is like completely abstract from you. You don't have to care about any of this stuff. You just have a prompt, and you're typing into the prompt and it's building and running an app for you, and it's all just magic and it happens and da 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 da. Like, and that in and of itself is an abstraction over an abstraction over an abstraction over an abstraction over an abstraction over, and so on and so on and so forth. Like, we're so a lot of people, especially the next generation of builders, I think, are so disconnected from the underlying stuff. And so I think we're going to kind of see this countercyclical effect, right? Like, where people will choose to say from a business perspective, it honestly makes a lot of sense to just be like, do I need IaaS? Do I need, all these SaaS things? Like, if I'm really sitting down doing the dollars and cents, like, doesn't it make more sense to just go buy a server and rack it? And what am I really losing, right? Like, what is that extra 9 worth is a good way to think about it. Because the other way that you can kind of construe this is, well, I do all, I'm on AWS, or I'm in the cloud. I'm using these abstractions so I can get more 9s, so I can have more uptime. I'm going from like 2 9s to 3 9s.
Right.
But how much does that extra, what is the actual value of that extra 9? And I think that to me is an open question for most people. And so that's what got me thinking about back to the point,
Yeah.
or I guess that was part of the point, but the small data bus was basically this, right? Like, hardware, like storage is so cheap, compute is so cheap, all this stuff is so cheap, and we overbuild because the way that we can think about all this stuff is through SaaS, through PaaS, through IaaS, da 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 da. Like, nothing says it has to be that way, and I think now, especially, like, what is some of the stuff that's like, why, what makes it hard to do like that? What makes it, why one of the reasons that you pay for someone to manage for you is because, like, oh, Linux admin is actually kind of challenging. But oh
Yeah.
wait, I can go pay $200 a month to OpenAI, and I have a bot that has memorized every man page ever.
Okay. Well, I mean, it sounds like we're just grappling with the same questions we always have in new ways,
Yeah.
which is pretty much what I sort of anticipated you saying. I don't know. It's
I do think that
stay the same.
I think that there is going to be something to be said about, like, a historical analog I'm reaching for right now is, if you think about WordPress and how many WordPress sites there are and how many WordPress providers. And I think that there is a somewhat useful analog there for sort of the observability, the whatever, right? Because for a lot of people, WordPress wasn't just, a CMS. It's like, this is their app. This is their business software. This is the thing that matters.
Yeah.
And the great thing about WordPress in a lot of ways is it gave people the ability to go and, like, build these nice web apps and build this presence for themselves that didn't require you know whatever, didn't require all this other crap, and it gave opportunities for other businesses to come in and say like, oh, we can provide value added services, right?
Yeah.
Like we can, I like there's a bunch. I think to the observability point, like you can still to this day go and spin up a WordPress site, and there will usually be, depending on your platform, there's probably like a partner integration where it's like you click this thing and you get your observability is taken care of for you. And it's over here, right? Like I can see stuff like that happening. Um, for AI apps, for like AI as an abstraction, where AI just kind of becomes like this general purpose, like WordPress shaped blob for a lot of people. I definitely think that companies like OpenAI are thinking about it that way. If you look at like what they've been trying to do with Codex and aligning all of these development assistance products, you know, and putting them together, like you can very easily see a world where OpenAI is just like, okay, well, what if we just like let people run persistent apps? Like we're running a platform, why not? And that's an interesting like road to walk down mentally.
Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing up a WordPress reference for my sake. The front end engineer. I need these uh, these front endy CMS
It's all
references. They
software.
resonate with me in particular.
It's all software.
Yeah.
There's my most controversial take is there's almost nothing, there's very little different. I think the current sort of moral panic around AI and software development is very similar to prior moral panics in the front end space
Mm-hmm.
around literally everything that happens that makes front end easier. Um,
Yes.
I'm old enough to remember when Dreamweaver was the death of the web, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I don't know. Like, whatever. People are gonna, if people want to be mad at me, people can be mad at me. Like, I think it is, every I'm old enough to remember when object-oriented programming was the death of software development, and how, I'm old enough to remember when IntelliSense was dumbing us all down and making us into terrible devs.
Yeah.
Like, these are just tools. And one of the things that I've seen come up quite a bit recently is like, oh, well, the tools are like they're poison, or they're bad. It's like
Right.
then, or it's like, oh, we shouldn't let people use these because of whatever reason, because it
Yeah.
like hurts them or something. I mean, I don't know. Do better. Like literally, tools are there is not necessarily a moral valence around tools or technology.
Mm-hmm.
There is certainly one around how it is used and how it is applied. And I think that it's high time for people that care about that shit to just do a better job than the assholes. Like if you would like to, like like just do stuff, do better stuff. Like, you control the buttons you push. And if you and sitting on the sidelines screaming about like, "Oh, this is immoral," or "This is making us all stupid," or like, "Oh, this is evil." Like, it's 2025. Like, I think we have a pretty good fucking idea of what's good and evil in the world, and, um, I think we can get off our butts and, like, we can do stuff. Like, there are we can find good applications for those things. We can find things that uphold our own, values and uplift the people that we want, and make technology and the internet and like all of the infinite untapped potential of human connection like accessible and important and all this good stuff, right? Like it's not impossible. But we have to do it. We have to work.
Yeah.
And that's what I would love for people to do more of. Do the work.
Do the work. I like it. Um, okay. So we are almost out of time, but I do want to close out by talking about OpenTelemetry and their role in all of
Yes.
this. So you mentioned OpenTelemetry in the context of documentation,
Mhm.
and I suspect they're doing a lot there. So would you mind just giving us kind of a rundown of where OTel is in terms of the larger MCP, AI, and observability space? Like, what
Yeah.
is OTel's position? What are you folks doing?
Well, we're obviously, been very excited to see the growth of Gen AI alongside OpenTelemetry, because this is sort of the first big technological thing that sort of happened post OTel, right? Like, and so it's the first thing that's growing up alongside of it. And so I think from a practical perspective, what you see is all these client libraries and agent frameworks and whatever else, all these things are being built with OTel natively integrated into them, which is great. So they all have tracing, they all have built-in context, they all have metrics, and they're doing stuff the right way, which is great. And we're trying to support that through in a couple of ways. One is we're supporting development of semantic conventions, so standard attributes and metadata for Gen AI. We're making some changes to the spec to allow for some things to aid in the instrumentation of AI apps, things like complex attributes. One of the things that I'm really interested in is you just kind of mentioned MCP and docs, like something I'm personally, so when's this come out anyway?
Whatever we want.
Everyone, okay. Well, I'm running for re-election to the OpenTelemetry Governance
Ooh.
Committee. I just sent in my nomination. So if
Oh,
anyone's
good
listening
luck.
to this, I'm going to give you a campaign speech.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Um, But one of the things I'm running for re-election to the OTel Governance Committee, and one thing I'm really interested in is if I'm reelected, is I want to, you know, kind of obliquely referred to this next generation of developers, people that are building with AI and building on top of these like new abstraction layers. And I think OTel has to be for those people, right? And so I want to work on building a better sort of local development experience for OTel. I want to work on how to integrate Gen AI into OTel more, or like connection points for OTel and Gen AI. So like a good example would be maybe a default MCP server um, for the collector, something like that, right? Better documentation for AI. And there's a couple of different challenges around all of this, right? But one thing that is, I think, really important is that we don't lose sight of the fact that like saying for AIs makes it sound like we're just pushing it all off to the AI, but it's really it's about the human and the AI working together to sort of solve these problems. So some of this does mean like when we talk about building OTel for AI, it's like, well, we're actually talking about like how do we allow developers to sort of express their intent around instrumentation, around what they care about observing, and then let the AI get better at translating that into instrumentation, right? How do we, and then how do we encourage the AI to do that in like good ways? So rather than just hard coding instrument fields, like how do we get the AI to build telemetry schemas and use code gen and use repeatable things rather than kind of one offs? And so that's something I'm interested in working on if I'm reelected. I want to kind of lead some efforts around that.
All right. Inspiring and sounds very practical to me, especially in relation to our conversation about how it is that the role of the SRE is going to be shifting here in the
Mm.
next few years. I mean, this is big. The job descriptions are already changing, and I suspect that's not going to slow down anytime soon.
No, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everything always changes. I think we're gonna, I do tend to think that we are, there's going to be a pullback, right? Like there's independent of anything. There feels very obvious that there is a bubble around Gen AI, to me at least.
Yeah.
And at some point, all bubbles do deflate. And we'll see what happens there. But I think that again, like I said at the beginning, like you could stop. You could take the model capabilities as they exist today and just do nothing but refine them, and you still have almost a decade, I think, of like productivity improvements and better tooling and all of this stuff, right? Like the capabilities are immense of what we have today if we can just like use it properly, right? Get the right UX, get the right integrations, get the right, figure out the right level of abstraction for LLMs. Um, and that's what's exciting to me, right? Not like all the other stuff that people talk about with Gen AI. Um,
Yeah. Okay. It's fantastic. I like to end on an optimistic note, so that's really great. How can folks keep up with your musings on this? I mean, you mentioned your Blue Sky account. You've got a blog. Like
yeah,
where are you
I'm
expressing
A
yourself these days?
Parker at aparker.io on Blue Sky, aparker.io on the web, aparker. aparker.io or aparker.io, pretty much everywhere, until whatever happens with .io domains happens, and then I'll have to go somewhere else.
Don't get too far ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, one problem at a time.
One problem
You
at a
can
time.
also find me around the world. I will be at, if you're going to KubeCon in Atlanta this fall, I'll be speaking there. I hope to see ya.
You'll be seeing me for sure.
Yep, and we'll be running some cool OpenTelemetry events there as well. So look me up. Yeah, and also I'm around. I go places. I do things.
I can confirm that. You pop up many of the
I do.
places I am.
I
This
pop
is
up
it.
in a lot of
It's
places.
Austin. All right, phenomenal. Okay, well, really enjoyed speaking with you today, Austin. Again, my name is Kate Holterhoff, Senior Analyst at RedMonk. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and review the Monkcast on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching us on RedMonk's YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, and engage with us in the comments.